Before the PlayStation, there was the Sega Genesis. Before the Genesis, there was the NES. And before the NES, laying the very groundwork for the console wars and the multi-billion-dollar gaming industry we know today, there was the Atari. In this video, we're diving deep into the history of the Atari 2600.
This was your first video game system. Don't you remember staying up all night? This is the best.
We're Atari. We have the vision, and we invented the technology.
A tomb where an entire industry was nearly buried.
Attention shoppers, the new Atari cartridge game is in.
On September 11th, 1977, a small wood-grained box would forever change entertainment in American homes. The Atari video computer system wasn't the first gaming console, or even the first to accept cartridges, but it accomplished something revolutionary. It transformed television sets into interactive gaming centers, bringing the arcade experience directly into living rooms across the nation. This unassuming device with its distinctive joysticks would establish the foundation for the multi-billion-dollar gaming industry we know today, becoming synonymous with video gaming itself during its heyday. The story of the Atari 2600 begins with Atari Inc., founded by Nolan Bushnell and Ted Dabney in 1972. The company had already made its mark with the wildly successful Pong, the first commercially viable arcade game. However, Bushnell recognized a fundamental problem with the dedicated home console market that was emerging. Each machine could play only one game, severely limiting their appeal and longevity. As Bushnell watched competitors like Magnavox flood the market with single-game systems, he envisioned something more versatile, a programmable home console that could play multiple games through removable cartridges. By the mid-1970s, Atari had acquired Cyan Engineering, a Grass Valley electronics company. Even before Atari released its home version of Pong, Cyan's engineers, led by Mayer and Ron Milner, had conceptualized a home console powered by programmable microprocessors that could play Atari's arcade offerings. The vision was sound, but the technology was prohibitively expensive. Microprocessors cost between $100 and $300, far beyond what the consumer market would tolerate. The technological breakthrough came in September 1975, when MOS Technology debuted the 6502 microprocessor for just $25 at the Westcon trade show in San Francisco. Even at $25, financial models showed that the 6502 would be too expensive. Atari got offered a planned 6507 microprocessor, a cost-reduced version of the 6502, negotiating the pair for just $12. The console was prototyped under the codename Stella, named after Joe DeQueer's bicycle. DeQueer, a recent graduate from UC Berkeley, was hired by Atari in December 1975 to debug the first prototype. By March 1976, a second prototype was completed with the help of Jay Miner, who created the Television Interface Adapter TIA, a chip designed to send graphics and audio to television sets. Bushnell made a fateful decision to stay afloat and raise capital for the 2600's launch. He sold Atari to Warner Communications for $28 million in October 1976. Warner provided approximately $120 million. Enough to fast-track Stella's development. However, Fairchild had already beaten Atari to market with its Channel F, the first microprocessor-based console with interchangeable cartridges, released in November 1976. Despite being second to market, Atari's console had significant advantages. Working with industrial designer Gene Landrum, they created a living room-friendly aesthetic with a wood grain finish. The cartridge design by James Asher and Douglas Hardy was engineered to resist static electricity problems, which was a major problem for home electronics of that period. Launched in September 1977, the Atari VCS retailed for $199, equivalent to about $1,000 now. Each unit came with 2 joysticks, a pair of paddle controllers, and the combat cartridge, which offered variations of tank and plane battles based on Atari's arcade hits Tank and Jet Fighter. At the heart of the Atari 2600 was the MOS Technology 6507, running at 1.19 MHz, though identical in silicon to the more widespread 6502 that powered early personal computers like the Apple II and Commodore PET. The 6507 was packaged with fewer memory address pins, 13 instead of 16, to reduce costs. This decision, combined with cartridge interface limitations, initially restricted the system to a mere 4 kilobytes of addressable memory. The console had just 128 bytes of RAM, not enough to store this sentence, let alone a game. The TIA chip allowed for only 2 players, 2 missiles, and a ball on the screen with the ability to play just 2 voices of audio simultaneously. These constraints forced developers to be remarkably creative, using programming tricks to display more objects than the hardware was designed to handle. The initial game lineup included titles like Air-Sea Battle, Video Olympics, with 50 Pong variations, Basic Math, and Indy 500, which came with special driving controllers. The home version of Breakout showcased colorful graphics that improved upon the arcade original's monochrome display. While these early games were simple, they demonstrated the system's versatility. First-year sales were modest, with Atari selling between 350,000 and 400,000 units in 1977. The company attributed this to production delays and consumer unfamiliarity with the concept of a cartridge-based system. In 1978, Atari manufactured 800,000 consoles but sold only 550,000, requiring additional financial support from Warner to cover losses. The turning point came in 1979 when Nolan Bushnell left Atari after disagreements with Warner's board about developing a successor to the 2600. That same year, 4 disgruntled Atari programmers left the company, frustrated by Atari's refusal to credit them for their work or share in the profits. They formed Activision, the first independent third-party developer for home consoles. This move would dramatically expand the 2600's game library and establish the business model that still dominates the console industry today. Atari obtained a license from Taito to develop a VCS conversion of the arcade phenomenon Space Invaders. Programmer Rick Maurer created a home version that, while not identical to the arcade, captured its addictive gameplay. Space Invaders became the 2600's first killer game, driving console sales to over 1 million units in 1980 alone, nearly doubling the install base to over 2 million. Other significant releases followed, including Adventure, a pioneering action-adventure game by Warren Robinett that allowed players to explore multiple screens and use items to solve puzzles. It also contained gaming's first widely recognized Easter egg, a hidden room that displayed Robinett's name in a protest against Atari's policy of anonymity for its developers. Stellar conversions of Atari's arcade hits continued with Asteroids, which pioneered the use of bank switching to access more than the 4 kilobytes of ROM the system was designed to handle. This technique allowed for larger, more complex games, pushing the 2600 beyond its initial limitations. Missile Command and Yaris's Revenge showcased the growing sophistication of 2600 games. By 1982, the Atari 2600 had become the dominant gaming system in North America, with over 10 million consoles sold in the United States. The term Atari had entered the vernacular as a synonym for video games in general, much as Nintendo would in the following decade. At its peak, the 2600 cost Atari about $40 to manufacture and sold for an average of $125, equivalent to $410 now. Game cartridges cost between $4 and $6 to produce, and were wholesaled for $19, creating a highly profitable business model. Activision's high-quality titles set a new standard for the platform, with games like River Raid, Chopper Command, and Pitfall, showcasing smooth graphics, innovative gameplay, and zero flicker, something that was a common problem in many Atari-produced games. Each Activision cartridge prominently featured the game designer's name on the box and in the manual, a practice that stood in stark contrast to Atari's refusal to credit its developers. The success of Activision opened the floodgates for other third-party developers, dramatically expanding the variety of games available for the system. Companies like Imagic, Parker Brothers, and even Atari's competitors Mattel and Coleco began developing titles for the 2600. By 1982, third-party games accounted for half of all VCS game sales, cementing the business model of hardware manufacturers and independent software developers that continues to define the gaming industry today. Mattel, under its M-Network brand, released high-quality titles like Tron, Deadly Discs, Super Challenge Football, and Bump and Jump. Parker Brothers brought popular licensed properties to the system, including The Empire Strikes Back, which let players control snowspeeders in battles with Imperial walkers, and adaptations of arcade hits like Frogger and Q*bert. The diversity of the 2600's game library was impressive. Adventure set the template for exploration-based games. Pitfall pioneered side-scrolling platformers with its jungle-traversing hero. Missile Command tapped into Cold War anxieties through gameplay, where players defended cities from incoming missiles. River Raid, designed by Carol Shaw, one of the industry's first prominent female game designers, introduced groundbreaking vertical scrolling shooter mechanics. Combat showcased competitive multiplayer gaming, while Warlords expanded this to support 4 players simultaneously. The Atari 2600 saw several hardware revisions throughout its lifespan. The original Heavy Sixer model, named for its 6 front switches and substantial internal RF shielding, gave way to a Light Sixer in 1978, with thinner plastic and lighter shielding. In 1980, the difficulty switches moved to the back of the console, creating the 4-switch model. In 1982, coinciding with the release of the Atari 5200, the VCS was officially renamed the Atari 2600, and a sleek all-black Darth Vader model replaced the wood-grain aesthetic. As the 2000s dominance grew, Atari's ambitions expanded as well. The company experimented with various peripherals to extend the console's capabilities. The keyboard controller and kids controller enabled educational games and more complex inputs. The video touchpad, bundled with Star Raiders, served as a specialized keypad with overlays to map in-game functions. Atari even developed wireless controllers utilizing infrared technology, though their performance was hampered by line-of-sight requirements and signal reliability issues. Despite its technical limitations, the 2600 inspired remarkable innovation from game designers. When Star Raiders came to the system in 1982, it delivered a surprisingly complex space combat simulation that required the video touchpad to manage the ship's various systems. Software companies stretched the hardware in ways Atari's engineers never anticipated. David Crane's Pitfall 2, Lost Caverns featured a custom display processor chip that enhanced the 2600's graphics capabilities and allowed for 3-channel music with drums. However, not all titles showcased such ingenuity. As the market expanded rapidly, the quality control that had characterized early 2600 releases began to deteriorate. Nowhere was this more evident than in Atari's handling of Pac-Man in 1982. As the arcade's most popular game, Pac-Man seemed like a guaranteed hit for the 2600. Atari secured the rights and, anticipating massive demand, produced 12 million cartridges, more than the existing install base of 10 million consoles. But the development was rushed, with programmer Todd Fry limited to just 5 weeks and constrained to a 4-kilobyte cartridge when 8 kilobytes would have allowed for a much better conversion. The resulting game bore little resemblance to the arcade original. Pac-Man ate video wafers instead of dots, the ghosts lacked eyes and flickered constantly, and the audio effects were jarring. While it sold over 7 million copies, making it the 2600's best-selling game, it damaged Atari's reputation and left the company with roughly 5 million unsold cartridges. The situation worsened later that year with E.T. the Extraterrestrial. Atari paid a reported $20 million for the license, but due to protracted negotiations, programmer Howard Scott Warshaw had just 6 weeks to develop the game for the 1982 holiday season. Despite Warshaw's best efforts, the game's confusing gameplay, particularly its infamous pits that players frequently fell into and struggled to escape, led to poor reviews. Though it sold over 1 million copies, Atari had manufactured 4 million, resulting in another massive inventory surplus. These missteps coincided with a broader market saturation. By December 1982, Warner Communications revised its earnings guidance downward, expecting only 10 to 15% growth instead of the projected 50%. The combination of Atari's high-profile disappointments, an oversaturated market, and a glut of low-quality third-party games began to erode consumer confidence in the video game industry. The market collapse accelerated through 1983, culminating in what became known as the video game crash of 1983. North American gaming industry revenues plummeted from $3.2 billion in 1983 to just $100 million by 1985, a staggering 97% drop. In September 1983, Atari infamously sent 14 truckloads of unsold cartridges and equipment to a landfill in New Mexico, a story that became an urban legend until the site was excavated in 2014, confirming that approximately 700,000 cartridges had indeed been buried.
A tomb where an entire industry was nearly buried.
And they found what they were looking for. Hundreds of games have been unearthed so far.
Atari's financial losses were catastrophic. $536 million in 1983 and another $425 million by mid-1984. The company's workforce shrank from 10,000 employees to just over 100 in a matter of months. By July 1984, Warner Communications sold most of Atari's assets to Jack Tramiel, the founder of Commodore International, for $240 million. Tramiel, a proponent of personal computers rather than dedicated gaming consoles, immediately halted development of new 2600 games. The North American video game market appeared dead, with many analysts predicting that home computers would replace dedicated gaming consoles entirely. However, the 2600 showed remarkable resilience. Even as the industry imploded around it, the console continued to sell, albeit at a much slower pace. Meanwhile, in Japan, Nintendo was preparing to revitalize the gaming industry with its Famicom system, which would launch in North America as the Nintendo Entertainment System in 1985. The NES employed many lessons learned from Atari's rise and fall, particularly in terms of quality control and licensing agreements with third-party developers. As Nintendo began rebuilding the market Atari had created, Tramiel's new Atari Corporation returned to the video game business. In 1986, the company released a redesigned, cost-reduced 2600 model, often referred to as the 2600 Junior. With a sleek, compact design that matched the aesthetics of the Atari 7800, a backward-compatible successor that had been mothballed during the crash, the 2600 Junior was marketed as a budget gaming option, priced under $50. With its massive library of games and affordable price point, the 2600 found new life in this second act. Atari released a small but steady stream of new titles between 1986 and 1989, including Sprintmaster and Secret Quest, the latter featuring design input from Nolan Bushnell himself. Third-party developer Epix brought its popular game series, Summer, Winter, and California, to the platform in 1987, showcasing what talented programmers could achieve on decade-old hardware. By 1986, the Atari 2600 had sold over 20 million units worldwide, an extraordinary achievement for a console that had weathered the industry's near extinction. Production of new games began to wind down by the end of the decade, with Atari's final official release being Klax in 1990, available only in PAL territories. After more than 14 years on the market, an unprecedented lifespan for a video game console, production of the Atari 2600 finally ended in 1992, along with the Atari 7800 and Atari 8-bit computers. While production had officially ceased in 1992, the Atari 2600's influence continued to resonate throughout the gaming industry. As personal computers became more powerful and console gaming shifted to 3D environments with the PlayStation and Nintendo 64, a curious phenomenon began to emerge: a growing community of enthusiasts dedicated to preserving and extending the legacy of the 2600. The mid-90s saw the birth of the homebrew scene for the Atari 2600. Ed Federmeyer's SoundX sound demo program had showcased what the 2600's audio capabilities could achieve in skilled hands, but it was his Tetris clone, Edtris 2600s, that truly launched the modern homebrew movement. Here was a brand new game for a system that had been officially dead for years, demonstrating that independent developers could still create compelling experiences for the platform. The homebrew community expanded throughout the late 1990s and early 2000s, with releases like Ebavision's Alfred Challenge, a platformer compatible with multiple worldwide television standards, and Zyp's Thrust Plus Platinum by Thomas Jentsch, which supported various control schemes. The community's technical knowledge grew, enabling increasingly sophisticated games that pushed the hardware far beyond what was thought possible during the console's commercial heyday. One of the most significant developments in the 2600's homebrew scene was the creation of the AtariVox in 2004 by Richard Hutchinson. This add-on device enabled in-game speech and high-score saves. Parallel to the hardware tinkering, the preservation of the 2600 software library became a priority for the retro gaming community. Some of the earliest emulation programming efforts focused on the 2600, resulting in accurate virtual implementations like Stella Z26 that allowed anyone with a computer to experience the system's games. The growth of the internet marketplace also transformed the collectability of the Atari 2600. While common titles like Combat or Asteroids could be found for about $1, rarer games began commanding impressive prices. Air Raid, with its distinctive blue T-handle cartridge, sold for over $30,000 at auction in 2010 when a complete boxed version surfaced. Other ultra-rare titles like Birthday Mania, Red Sea Crossing, and Pepsi Invaders, a Space Invaders variant commissioned by Coca-Cola for an internal event, became the holy grails of Atari collecting, with prices ranging from $14,000 to $50,000 for authenticated copies. Recognizing the enduring appeal of its legacy, the Atari brand itself, which had changed hands several times since Tramiel's era, began embracing its heritage in the 2000s. In 2003, a new iteration of the company called Infogrames rebranded all its global operations as Atari, after acquiring the rights to the name. In 2005, this new Atari released the Flashback 2, a plug-and-play console that accurately recreated the 2600 experience with 40 built-in games. The Flashback 2's hardware was so faithful to the original that enthusiasts discovered it could be modified to accept original cartridges, bridging the old and new. In 2017, the Atari 2600 celebrated its 40th anniversary, with retrospectives in gaming publications and special events at museums and retro gaming conventions. That same year, the Atari brand announced the development of a new console called the Atari VCS, which would incorporate modern capabilities while honoring the company's heritage. The new Atari VCS launched with a substantial price tag of $390 for the all-black Onyx base model, while the walnut model with the classic wood-front design commanded $400. Bundles including both the classic-style joystick and modern controller pushed the price over $400, positioning it as a premium retro gaming solution. The system ran on a custom Linux-based operating system called Atari OS that supported two distinct modes: Atari mode for playing classic games through the Atari Vault collection, which included over 100 arcade and Atari 2600 titles, and modern indie games specifically developed for the platform. It also allowed users to access streaming services like Netflix and Disney+, browse the web, and even run productivity software when not gaming. The Atari 2600 Plus represents the latest chapter in the enduring legacy of the original console, officially launched in 2023 as a modern reimagining of the classic system. This HDMI-compatible revival maintains the iconic wood-grain aesthetic and distinctive silhouette of the original 2600 while offering compatibility with both new and original cartridges. The 2600 Plus comes bundled with a recreation of the famous CX40 joystick and a 10-in-1 game cartridge featuring classics like Adventure, Combat, and Missile Command, allowing players to experience these foundational games on modern televisions at 720p resolution. As we approach the console's 50th anniversary in 2027, the Atari 2600 stands as more than just a nostalgic relic. It remains an active platform with a dedicated community of developers, collectors, and players. It was far more than just a console. It was a cultural earthquake that irrevocably shifted the landscape of entertainment. The 2600 transformed living rooms across the globe into personalized arcades, democratizing access to video games and fundamentally reshaping how we engaged with interactive media. It served as the crucible where many core concepts of console gaming were forged, from third-party development to the marketing and licensing of titles. Atari laid a foundational layer for the gaming world we know today. For these reasons and many more, it cemented its place as one of the most influential and beloved gaming platforms of all time. Thanks for joining me on this trip through the history of this legendary console. If there is any interesting gaming phenomena you'd like me to cover, let me know in the comments below, and don't forget to subscribe and hit that notification button so you don't miss more videos like this one. See you next time.